Exploring World History by Ray Notgrass with Charlene Notgrass and John Notgrass, Lesson 37, Ancient China. They called themselves Chung Kao, the Middle Kingdom. In their minds, they were the center of the world. They had given rise to significant inventions and developments that have affected the rest of the world. We call this land China. The Shang Dynasty. The pattern should be familiar by now. Farming villages dot the banks of a mighty river. A few nobles own most of the land and the best houses, and they have the greatest wealth and the most political power. Competing lords vie for power during years of civil strife until one man or one family emerges victorious. This pattern occurred in many countries. In China, it took place along the twisting Yellow River in northern China. It was a river given to the alternating droughts and floods, the River of Sorrows, as it was called, often drought destruction to those who depended on it for life. The Shang dynasty was the earliest succession of rulers in this region. It held power between about 1600 and 1100 BC. Even at this early date, the Chinese showed their remarkable intellectual capacity. They developed a system of writing using pictograms, agreed upon symbols illustrating objects they knew. The next step involved ideograms, symbols that represented concepts. Written Chinese developed some 3,000 symbols, and eventually about 50,000 characters were used. This made the language difficult to use, especially by anyone not wealthy enough to take the time to learn it. Because they wrote on vertical strips of bamboo and wood, they wrote in vertical columns instead of across a page. During the Shang dynasty, the Chinese developed the use of bronze for practical and aesthetic purposes. They created inventions such as the two-wheeled war chariot and an early form of porcelain. Mathematicians in China developed a decimal numbering system. Astronomers created a calendar that consisted of 12 months and 365 and a quarter days. Shang artisans developed products of silk, jade, and ivory that became much sought after by traders. Natural barriers of mountains and deserts made contact between the Chinese and other people groups to the west difficult. However, the Chinese established trade with Mesopotamia fairly early on, and despite having to deal with invaders from Manchuria and Mongolia, the days of the Shang also saw the spread of spiritual ritual that continues in some form even today. The Chinese believed that powerful gods controlled life, weather, crops, and all aspects of life. The people tried to influence the gods not only by their own prayers and rituals, but by calling on their deceased ancestors to appeal to the gods as well. To impress the ancestors of their sincerity and need, the people began the practice of ancestor worship. People would sometimes walk to ask their ancestors a question. A priest would write the question, usually a question that could be answered yes or no, on a piece of bone, making notches in it, and apply a heated rod to the notches. The way the bone cracked would be interpreted by the priest as the ancestor's answer. Thousands of those oracle bones have been found at ancient religious sites. Today, many Chinese worship, or at least pay their respects to their ancestors in home ceremonies. The Zhou Dynasty. The Shang dynasty was overtaken by the Zhou dynasty around the end of the 12th century BC. The Zhou rulers continued for almost 1,000 years until 256 BC. The Zhou believed in what they called the mandate of heaven. They believed that an emperor had a divine right to rule if he ruled well. If he did not, he deserved to fall. They thought the Shang had failed to rule well and so deserved to lose their power. Proclaiming adherence to the mandate of heaven, of course, was a handy rationale for seizing and holding power. Because the Zhou had to rule such a large area, they developed a feudal system of power. The Zhou emperor allowed nobles to rule their smaller kingdoms as they saw fit and promised protection for them. In return, the nobles promised loyalty, paid tribute, and when called upon, gave service to the emperor. The Zhou government encouraged farming, and the period saw the introduction of fertilizer, iron tools, irrigation, and the ox-drawn plow. The feudal system apparently did not work well enough, however. Most of the last half of the Zhou period was marked by wars among the feudal states. One important development that affected government and society was the growth of a large bureaucracy to oversee the governing of the empire. Government officials eventually became the ruling class because of their power and because they acquired large land holdings. In the Zhao class structure, below the ruling class was the farming class, honored because they worked the fields. Then came the artisans and the merchants, who were below farmers because they did not work on the land. At the bottom were the soldiers. Confucius and other philosophers. As Chinese scientists gained insight about the physical world, Chinese philosophers wanted to gain greater insight into human relationships. Although they recognized the spiritual world, they were more concerned about the practical matters of right living in this life. They wanted to determine the way to establish and maintain a stable, orderly society and government. With the frequent instability they saw in our government, their goal is understandable. Confucius, the best-known philosopher in ancient China, was born about 551 BC. Confucius became a scholar and was employed as a minor government official. He eventually became a tutor to the sons of wealthy families. Confucius was deeply troubled by war, and he wanted to learn how to live a life based on high moral ideals. As he thought through the issues that made for a good life and a good society, he tried to teach his philosophy to various government officials. They rejected him, however, so he devoted himself to teaching a small group of disciples who in turn could influence others. He did not write down his insights, but his disciples did and compiled them into what are called the Analects. Confucius tried to identify what practices made for peace among people and between citizens and their government. He believed that the practice of virtues produced harmony in society. These virtues, he said, should be practiced in 5 relationships: ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, older brother and younger brother, and friend to friend. In each relationship, each party has a duty and the other has a responsibility to fulfill. Family relationships especially, Confucius believed, were the foundation for a happy and stable society. The disciples of Confucius had greater success in getting their teacher's ideas across to others than Confucius himself did. Confucianism eventually had a great impact on Chinese law, government, and family life. His principles were not always followed, but they were influential. His insights came at a time when the Chinese did not know revealed truth about God and his ways. So they were an attempt to fill the void that people, families, and societies always have without such divine teaching. Many of the sayings that Confucius wrote and compiled are good advice, but followers of Jesus know that they will never find true inner peace and salvation merely by trying to live well. Taoism. Little is known about Laozi, the author of Tao Te Ching. Laozi disagreed with Confucius about the value of behavior. He said the way to happiness is by becoming attuned to the Tao, or the way, the universal force that pervades everything. This is accomplished not by reason, but by contemplation. Whereas Confucius encouraged right actions, Laozi encouraged little doing and much contemplation. While Confucius wanted to encourage government to do what is right, Laozi favored a restrained or limited government. The Taoism, pronounced Taoism, that developed in ancient China was a combination of philosophy and mystical religion. Taoist priests had charms and spells to ward off evil spirits. These practices appealed to the common people who believed strongly in such spirits and who believed that they had to cope with them every day. Taoism encouraged the simple life and a time for personal meditation. It also exalted closeness with nature. Byproducts of this philosophy included some scientific advances. The Chinese became expert students of astronomy and botany. Gunpowder might have been developed first to use in firecrackers to frighten ghosts. When the compass was developed, it was first used for superstitious purposes, such as the positioning of graves. But sailors eventually recognized its value for navigation. Legalism. A third philosophy is known as legalism. Its chief advocate was Han Fei Cao, who died around 233 BC. Han took the opposite approach from Taoism regarding government. He believed that the good society could only be created through a strict, activist government with a ruler who held absolute power. Han saw that people can be swayed by selfishness, fear, and emotional appeals, and are not always able to make good decisions. The only way to get people to do right is for the ruler to make laws that are reinforced with attractive rewards and strict punishments. Later dynasties. In 221 BC, the feudal state of Qin emerged victorious from another period of civil war and established the Qin dynasty, pronounced Qin, from which we get the word China. The new emperor decided to implement legalism and tried to impose unity on the empire. He reorganized the feudal states as administrative units. Directly responsible to him, the Qin began an extensive program of public works, including roads that helped to tie the empire together. But the projects took a heavy toll in the workers' lives lost. One project of the Qin dynasty was the connection of several smaller walls to create a defensive barrier in the north. The Qin did not build the Great Wall as it stands today. Future leaders continued the development of this fortification. However, not even their early version of the wall protected the Qin from their dynasty collapsed around 206 BC. The country endured another 8 years of civil war before the Han dynasty restored order. The Han adopted Confucianism, expanded the country's borders, and established peace for some 200 years. To create a more effective government, the Han rulers instituted a civil service system to train people for the difficult civil service exam. An educational system was developed. The exam required knowledge of Confucianism, so the philosophy was taught in the schools. The Han dynasty oversaw improvements in the written Chinese language, so effective that the language remained largely unchanged until 1949. Paper made from pulpwood and rags came to be produced, which encouraged the use of writing. Books of Chinese history were compiled during this time, and scientific achievements, including the recognition that eclipses were regular phenomena and not actions of an angry god, as well as the first known identification of sunspots. The Chinese produced sundials, water clocks, and a calendar that remained in use until 1912. Advances in technology included the wheelbarrow, the water mill, a harness for farm animals, and improved loom for weaving. The Han emperors encouraged foreign trade with Western Asia and Europe. So much silk was sent out that the main trade route became known as the Silk Road. Buddhism was introduced into China during this period and gained a wide following among people who identified with the plight of suffering in the world. The Han dynasty fell in 220 AD, which led to another period of civil war and a decline in foreign trade. By the works of the law no flesh will be justified in his sight, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin, Romans 3:20.